Hello everyone. To the third topic for today, which is I saw this. So I will be talking about how to document our code, and this was inspired by a tweet from, I don't remember his name. It's one of the guys from RailsCore who tweeted about the problem with where to keep the documentation, whether to keep it in the code comments or whether to keep it in Git Commit Messages. So you see many people which are vocal about not agreeing to having code comments, and I'm actually one of them. Having those two options, I prefer the commit message to let you explain what you did and maybe why you did it this way, and maybe you want to document that there's a hack. However, I agree with this argument claiming that this is archaeology, and then you have to. It's not so easy to review the Git commits for a specific part of the application, why it was done like that. However, I believe that with good IDE, for example, I use RubyMine, so the IntelliJ toolset, and with Git, there's always a way of selecting one file or one module or one directory and just see what were the commits and just review the history. So we have the history of the changes. But I think it's still not perfect. And my solution to this is that when I have modules, I try to have modules in directories. So when I create a Ruby application, I will have a module for a read model. So for a directory for a read model, I will have a directory. So read model is something that you display on the website, with some code involved for how to keep the data for that. If I have some, I don't know, ordering bounded context, I will have some files like order and commands related to order, or events like order confirmed. I will have it in the one directory, and then in this directory I will keep a Readme file, which is a markdown file where I'll document a brief description of what this module is about, so the main building blocks. The second section is usually documenting the technical debt. There's always some kind of technical debt, so it might be just a simple list of points like this part was ugly, and so there's a list of things which are ugly in this module. This is probably the most important part, and the third part is the chronological situation. So it's kind of similar to Git Commit Messages, where you just document, okay, on this day I have introduced this and this to the module because it was required by this ticket, and I can link the ticket. So those three parts usually are enough for me. The second part about technical debt is mostly important. I see this as important to document where we consider technical debt, not as a way of having a backlog of those things. However, it's useful as that, but many times I work with developers, and it's not always super clear whether something that I consider a technical debt is a technical debt to another person, to another developer in the team. So having it clearly documented that someone believes this is a technical debt, this is a hack maybe, it's okay, because we don't need to be trying to be diplomatic, or there is no hard communication around that. We just both agree that there is this is a problematic code, and I don't have to discuss whether we want to fix it or not. So once it's in the technical debt section, then we can assume that we want to fix it, right? So that's the agreement, kind of. Obviously, when I push a commit to this Readme file, adding a new technical debt, this might be a good idea for other people in the team to jump in with their comments and saying whether they agree with the concept that this is a technical debt or not. So we can discuss it. Maybe they will convince me that this is not a technical debt. At least the result is either there is a new point in the technical debt, or the point disappears because it's not there, or we can just say, or I can just type in the end, okay, as for me, this is a technical debt. So I'm just saying, according to Andrzej, this is the technical debt, right? So we don't have to have an full agreement. Other people can think about it, and it's just a documentation. So obviously, as with any documentation, there's no easy way to have it in sync, right? So the code may change, the documentation, people may forget about changing the documentation, people are refactoring, they're doing it in rush. So the documentation will always be somehow behind. Now, those three sections, how they can be behind. The first section is the description of the module. So it's mostly about the summary, what the module does, what are the building blocks. And this is easy to I think review from time to time and just, you know, update it, kind of have a eventual consistency for documentation. So sooner or later someone will spot that, okay, this is actually now completely different, so we need to change it. The second part is the technical debt, and this is something that also will go out of sync, because one day someone decides that they want to fix a technical debt, one part of it. They will clean this area of the code. So for example, you can say there is this huge method, it's a technical debt, we need to clean it later. And someone does that, but they forget to remove this item from the technical debt. But if we have a habit that whenever you start working on this module, I try to build my habit of reviewing the Readme file every time I start and every time I end working on this module. And working on a feature usually involves working on 1 or 2 or 3 modules. So I'll just review and see whether it's still there or not. So I have this kind of habit to try to improve. But even with those habits, the documentation will still be slightly out of date. The third part of the Readme, so the chronology of the situation in this module, this is probably least important. Like, okay, someone didn't add what they did, but this is already a redundancy. We already have Git Commit Messages for this part, so the chronological part can be always easily retrieved. So the Readme file is kind of like a read model for developers, right? So it's a summary, it shouldn't be like super long. Just a quick overview, okay, usually I need the reminder what are the hacks, because people tend to forget, and I tend to forget what are the hacks in this module. So when I start working this module, I need to go there, because I'm usually assuming optimistically that most of the stuff is fine. I can just use this module and, you know, or extend it, but then, oh, this is actually wrong. We have this problem here, and maybe it's better to start with cleaning the technical debt and then later working on this, on the feature. And modules are not always features, right? Sometimes you have a module for persistence or for something like that, and it's not really a feature. So between those 3 options, just to summarize, code comments, I don't like them because they either describe what is happening in the code, so I would extract it to this Readme file, or there is some number of to-do things, which either is about technical debts or there are actual new features to be added. And most of the time I just don't like the idea that I want to just read the code. I don't want the mix of code and comments. The code is the living thing, so I can help myself with some IDE or with some editor settings where I just hide the comments, but I think the coupling at the file level is not perfect. Obviously code comments, similarly as the Readme, can go out of date. I think I'm more annoyed when I see out of date comments in the code than when it's separated. Git commit messages is another way. Sometimes I see my friends working on some features and the commit messages are almost like blog posts, and it's awesome. I will look at the Git commit messages as well during my work, just to make sure whether I missed something. So I just right click on a directory and see just the commits which are related to this part. So usually there is like no more than, I don't know, 20 or 30. It's easy to just quickly review. It's just a couple minutes of work, and I know what is happening. But I think this is more like retrieving. This is like joining the data from the Git repository, and the Readme part, the third option, is to my understanding, this is the best one. Still not perfect, right? So it can go out of sync. I know there's some tooling, or I hope there is some tooling that can actually help you with those Readme files. So maybe there is a tool for better visualization of this, maybe converting this into a wiki page. Maybe to make it visible at the higher level, what are the modules. So I believe there is some tooling. I've actually don't remember using such tooling, so I think the files are usually enough for my case. Okay, that's enough. Let me know if such lives make sense for you. So this was probably like half an hour, maybe less. And I'm trying to cover like what was recently discussed at Arkency, or what's inside my head right now, what I'm working on, and what are the current discussions that are happening. So thanks for watching, and see you in the next video, hopefully. Goodbye, have a nice weekend.